Hi, good morning. Welcome to our second technical webinar on the FSC Policy for Association Remediation Framework. We have here today our dispute resolution team and technical experts that will be providing a presentation. My name is Amparo Arellano. I will be the facilitator today, and I'm also part of the dispute resolution team. We have Salient Jones, who is a program manager of the FSC dispute resolution here in FSC International. And then we have Anna Jenkins and Shizuka Yasui, who are our technical experts and that are involved in the development of the FSC remediation framework and that are going to be providing today the presentation. Next slide, Alex, please. Our objectives for today, as for the remaining webinars that we have been hosting in the last month, are ultimately to provide you with the technical information that you have, and mostly to really open up for a discussion and questions that you might have in relation to this framework. We want to make sure that you really have an opportunity to raise any questions that you have and to specifically bring us feedback on how we can improve this framework moving forward in the next versions. So as an expected outcome, we expect to have an opportunity for you to share your views and to provide feedback to FSC. And if we see that there's further needs for that, we will arrange on how to make it happen. Next slide, please. On the logistics of the webinar, the same as the other webinars we have been hosting, we are recording the session, so please make sure that you're okay with your camera being turned on and that you know that this will be being uploaded to the FSC website at a later stage. We are providing simultaneous translation to Bahasa Indonesia, so if you prefer to listen to the discussion and the presentation in Bahasa, then you feel free to click in the menu at the bottom, and then you can make sure that you listen in Bahasa instead of English. And your questions can also be translated, no problem. Next slide, please. On how to participate, we are making some slight changes to how we organized it last time on the 2nd of July. So we do want to give a priority to Slido. So that means that first we will take any questions that are written in Slido. We have sent the link already. Then we will be looking into hands raised in Zoom chat. And then after that, we will look into the Zoom chat. So please try to prioritize writing your comments in Slido rather than the Zoom chat to make sure that, that you have an opportunity to engage. If you want to be anonymous, you can also write to me a message private, and then we will make sure that we take your question without giving your name. And yeah, we will mostly consolidate all the questions to the end of the conversation. First, we will have a presentation, and then we will have an extensive Q&A where we'll go over all the questions from the different stakeholders. So hopefully you'll engage in this conversation. Next slide, please. Yeah, as I mentioned, Slido is going to be our main platform for today. You have 3 ways of joining. It should be rather easy. You can use the QR code, you can use the link and then enter the password FSC remediation, or you can also click on the link that we sent in the chat. You can also remain anonymous on Slido, so please feel free to also send anonymous questions through that means. And if you have any issues with joining, please let us know, and we will try to assist you with that. Next slide, please. Then I'm handing over now to Salem, who's going to give us a welcome and then go run through the agenda for today, and then we will move into the presentation.
Great, thanks, Amparo. Welcome, everyone, to the second technical webinar on the Policy for Association Remediation Framework. My name is Salem Jones, and I will be walking through today the agenda that we're going to cover. In the second webinar, we're going to concentrate on the remedy of environmental harm sections. So we will go through the section R, remedy, and take a deep dive into the remedy of harm for environmental harm. We will also go through the policy for association modules. Those are sections A through F. We will take questions at the end of the presentation slides to ensure that we go through the entire presentation. And we will open the floor for discussion and for questions. I think learning from our previous conversations, we would be very happy to concentrate on specific issues in the slides today. So if there's particular issues that you have that you would like to go through the requirements, indicators, and guidance, please highlight those in your question, and we can move directly to that part of the remediation framework. Without any further questions at this point, I would like to hand the floor over to Anna, who will walk us through the first sections of the remediation framework that we will cover today. Anna, please go ahead.
Anna, you can unmute yourself now.
Thanks. Yeah, I wasn't able to unmute myself on my own. So thanks, everyone. Hi, and welcome to this next section. We're going to be going through section R, which is the general remedy of harm requirements, and through RE, remedy of environmental harm. And then Shiz will do sections A to F after me. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we did look at a little bit of this in the last session about the mapping parts. So this comes under the identification of environmental and social harm. So we won't go over those again today, but if you do have questions, completely fine to ask. We'll be looking at the procedures to remedy harm, the requirement for pilot cases, and looking at transparency and progress. Next slide, please. So these are the requirements: identification and respect of rights and rights holders, identification and engagement of stakeholders. Those are repeats from section U, the very first section. And they're repeated here as reminders that we need to keep double checking that we have the right people in the room. Then it starts in earnest at requirement 3.3, identification of environmental and social harm. This includes the mapping and then prioritization. And then we have development, we have to develop procedures to remedy harm. We have pilot cases of remedy of harm, and then we have transparency and demonstration of progress. Next slide, please. So let's have a look at a bit more detail. So in 3.3.1, we have methodologies to deliver mapping and inventories of past and current status in all impact areas of the company group and its wood suppliers. And this is the section that we went through, this and 3.3.2, which is the actual maps and inventories that come from the methodologies in 3.3.1. We went through this in the last webinar in more detail. And then we have the Registry of Harm, which is where all harm is recorded with the known causes of that, all known cases of that harm, with some root causes as well recorded there. And again, we went through that in last session. And then we have prioritization of cases for remedy of harm. So these are the salient human rights issues and what we're calling salient environmental issues. This means the key issues that are most likely to happen and that are most likely to take place under kind of the circumstances that we might expect to see in the region. But these would be identified by the stakeholder groups and the company themselves. So then we would have independent monitoring reports on the progress of the identification and prioritization of harm, with public summaries published annually. Next slide, please. And actually that last section about the monitoring, there's a key stakeholder question in the consultation on that. So we value your input there. Section 351, we need to have pilot cases. And these methodologies and these procedures to remedy harm, these are new processes, new approaches, and all involved need to learn and pilot as we go, particularly in the beginning. So pilot cases do need to be chosen right at the beginning of the process, and these would need to represent a wide range of different kinds of cases. So they could be small cases involving perhaps an individual. They would need to be also larger cases, perhaps involving a wider area, a wider community or communities. And so these pilot cases obviously would become more prominent, will be most prominent early on in this process. And then there will be an iterative process in order to learn from those pilot cases. And then we have independent monitoring reports would need to be published again, on these pilot cases. And again, there's the stakeholder question on independent monitoring is there in the consultation. Next slide, please. Okay, so perhaps an unusual metaphor for forests, but we found it really helpful to think about the iceberg metaphor and about the different stages when we're identifying harm. So we did show this in the other webinar, but we're showing it again now because this really is a key concept. So what we have is when there is a complaint to FSC against the policy for association, then there's an investigation that takes place by FSC using procedure 01009. And that will look at the complaint, and it may also look at some other perhaps key and obvious areas, but it's not going to see everything. So that's just the part of the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg, as we typically say, is what's looked at during the complaint process. And so what about the rest of what's happening? What's under the surface of the water and the deeper parts of the iceberg? So this is what the company-specific roadmap addresses, what the process addresses. So the point of this slide is to say that all of the situation that is under the surface, all the information that isn't yet known, is not going to come to light before we have a company-specific roadmap. It's not going to be like all the existing harm that has happened isn't going to be known before the company-specific roadmap. The investigation will look at the tip of the iceberg and will decide, is there a case here or not for disassociation or a roadmap even without disassociation? But it assesses, is there a case to answer here, and does something need to happen? If yes, then we move to the company-specific roadmap process. So the key points here are that identification of harm is part of the remediation framework and roadmap process. And there's no attempt for that to be fully done before the roadmap is started. And it's this identification of the full picture is done through an engagement process with stakeholders, with rights holders. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to look at the remedy of environmental harm now. So that we call this section RE. And this includes a landscape level conservation and restoration plan. It includes site level conservation and restoration plans that come from that landscape level plan, and the implementation of the pilot plans at site level. Next slide, please. So we have these 4 sections, And we start with the landscape level conservation and restoration plan. In our last webinar, we did have some feedback about the term landscape level, and that being potentially a little bit confusing because it implies that maybe a company that was having to implement this would have to form a very formal landscape plan with neighbouring landowners and land managers. And what we're meaning here by the landscape level plan is we're meaning the biggest picture from the perspective of the company. Now, obviously, your neighbouring land managers would be very key stakeholders in the process, but we're not using the term landscape level planning as is used elsewhere. So I think this may be something where we need to use a slightly different term here so that there isn't confusion. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's have a closer look at this landscape level conservation and restoration plan. This is to remedy past impact of the company group and its wood suppliers, and it's developed with the participation of rights holders and other stakeholders. And this must include areas proportionate to the total area of natural forest converted since 1994, high conservation values destroyed since 1999, illegal logging, and that includes encroachment, areas for conservation and restoration proportionate to total impact area, and the restoration of the actual or equal areas to those impacted. So this term equivalent is really key term, and the other key term here is proportionate. So we are looking at one-to-one. Proportionate means one-to-one conservation and restoration to that of the impact area. And equivalent areas means this has to be the same habitat type. So peat landscape, where there's damage to peat, then the conservation and restoration has to be to also to peat landscape, and peat landscape of a similar quality, either restoring back to the high quality, which is a big challenge, or conservation of a similarly high quality area, representing what the area looked like before the damage occurred. So next slide, please. So continuing with this, then we have the prioritization of areas and activities that are proximate, and that's another key word here, to the impact areas. So what we're looking for is as close as possible to the impact area. So if it's not the impact area itself that is being restored, which may not always be appropriate or possible, then it's conservation or restoration very, very close by. Then we're looking for, obviously, consultation with rights holders and stakeholders, with the public, and with independent experts on this landscape level conservation and restoration plan. And then we do also, it's not featured on this page, but we do have a requirement for additionality as well. And so we do need to see that these conservation and restoration areas are bringing additionality. So then we have to be sure that this, then we're moving into site conservation and restoration plans. And these must be developed with the participation, again, of course, with rights holders and with conservation and restoration partners. So often it's going to be very appropriate that companies or organizations that have roadmaps work with conservation and restoration partners. They may not want to deliver all of this conservation and restoration themselves. It may be just much more appropriate to work with specialists and specialist providers. So then we need to see the completion of priority activities that are identified in the site conservation and restoration plans prior to the ending of disassociation. And then we also need to see publication on the remediation progress demonstration website of progress of reports on these pilot sites that will be that need to be chosen and then will be piloted through this process. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is Shiz's section. So can we go back to the last slide? Just to highlight that you can see from the numbering that we have just chosen highlighted indicators here. We've not read through everything verbatim, and we've just chosen the highlighted points. But if you do want to go through things in more detail and the actual fine point remediation framework of this section, then we can do that in the Q&A. So do ask if you want to see the full section and discuss it in this section today. So I'm going to hand over to Shiz now, and she'll go through sections A to F.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Shiz.
Okay, great. So it's first webinar and finally it's my turn coming. Let me explain set of section A to F. It's new sections. We did not have it in APP roadmap or generic roadmap we previously working. This may be scary for some people who already know the previous the progress, yeah, another 6 section because it's another 6 new section coming after quite meaty 5 mandatory sections already. We already have. Yeah, but don't worry. These are just corresponding the PFA policy elements, 6 unacceptable activities, as you know, and these are applied depending on what PFA elements were violated by each cases. So for example, some very serious big case that violate multiple unacceptable activities needs to go multiple sections that correspond their wrongdoings. And for example, case only have violated the ILO elements, then it goes with section F only. That is about ILO conventions. So that's the idea we reached when we had old generic roadmap on our plates and needs to transform into the PFA remediation framework. So mandatory section that is previously presented by Anna, section U and U, R, and T. Is mostly cover major remediation performance to be implemented. But this section A to F are here to navigate the company's specific roadmap drafting process and to cover anything missed in the main sections of remediation framework. So conversion remedy procedure is something developed in a different part of FSC. It's plugged in section D. That's our idea currently, and still lots of work and discussion needed on how to integrate this conversion remedy procedure into the remediation framework. But the idea is this is where relation of conversion remedy procedure and the remediation framework is clarified and navigated. Okay, so move to next slide. So section A is for illegal logging and trade in illegal wood and forest products. It's quite empty. The draft one do not specify anything additional because draft team considered the main section of remediation framework such as controlled supply chain and settle payment like overdue tax and fines, etc., and the anti-corruption requirements in trust building section covers quite good correctional measure around illegal logging and trade. And any harm caused by illegal logging and trade should be covered by the remedy of harm section, both for environment and social. So, so it's quite empty, but please let us hear what you think. Personally, this is my favorite area of remediation framework. And I have a gut feeling that we missed something. Yeah, next slide, please. Section B is for violation of traditional and human rights in forestry operations. So it should be already covered in the remedy of social harm sections, but the draft team listed up here, the human rights, that's not to be forgotten, such as health and safety for workers and public health and impact that impacts in specific area, wider region, global level, as it is getting more and more critical. So we're going to see we have the 4 areas. The first one is workers' health and safety that meets international code of practice at minimum. And second point is about chemical use. Damage to environment and human health from chemical use is prevented, mitigated, and remedied. And the third point is about risk of fire. It should be assessed and mitigated. And the fourth point, greenhouse gas emission from operations should be evaluated and steps taken to improve bad impacts better. Maybe Anna has some more deep thoughts behind this greenhouse gas emission clause, but I'll leave it for now as we need to hurry to finish this presentation to get more time for the discussion. Next slide, please. Section C is for destruction of HCVs in forestry operations. Again, it's quite blank because the draft team considered it is sufficiently covered in the main remedy of harm sections. So nothing additional here. So next slide, please. Okay, section D, it's a bit meaty section today. So it's for significant conversion of forest to plantation or non-forest use. It says additional requirements, but it's more like navigation rather than additional requirements. So what draft team identified was PFA matters significant conversion, and the conversion policy matters conversion, and these two difference is quite significant. So let me review it in more detail first before going to the next slide. So FSC wants to have conversion within the system, right? At the principle and criteria level, it does not allow conversion after November 1994. And the forest management company can not even apply for certification, but this 1994 rule is only applicable for FM certification applicants. So for example, the COC certification applicants who has a parent company of plantations that was established after 1994 can still apply for COC certification. Here comes PFA. It does not accept significant conversion, not only for FM applicants, but any organizations associated with FSC cannot violate this because it's unacceptable activity for FSC. And not only applicants, but their affiliates, as long as it is under the same decision-making party. So for example, back to the COC applicants, that for example, if its parent company, its plantation, has done conversion still very recently on the large area or converted HCV forest, that's when conversion is considered as significant, and either converted HCV forests or more than 10,000 hectares in past 5 years, or more than 10% of area under the responsibility in past 5 years converted, then it's considered as significant. But what to be considered significant is up to investigation panel. So when conversion is significant, the consequence is disassociation or pending association process. So what I want to point here is the scale of severeness is different for FSC between conversion and significant conversion. So here's a draft proposed. So here's a draft of the remediation framework proposes two scenarios. For organization done significant conversion, they are responsible on conversion harm from company group and also from its suppliers following full remediation framework process. And for organization done conversion but not considered as significant, then they are responsible on conversion harm from company group only. And this type of organization can use conversion remediation as a conversion remedy procedure instead of remediation framework. So that sounds reasonable to make two different levels like this for drafting, but we are super keen to hear what you think. Next slide, please. So we put fixed question in the consultation platform around it. So even for the within the significant conversion remedy, when we think about the scope of liability, should we consider conversion part and significant conversion part separately? Next slide. So we put fixed question. Also, our idea proposes differentiate by adding the supplier's conversion in liability or not. So in any scenario, applicants and its affiliates in the same group that covered by PFA definition should implement remedy for conversion. But when there's conversion considered as significant, then the supplier's part to be added to. Still, the organization is responsible to do the remedy, but take responsibility of their purchase that comes from conversion by the suppliers. So this responsible for suppliers conversion come from board advice when FSC developed APP roadmap. So just, yeah, this is just letting you know the background. It's not coming from somewhere out of the blue, something like that. Okay, so next slide. Section is introduction of GMO. This section we keep blank, very blank for now, as there is another forum within FSC discussing about GMO introduction, and we cannot do anything before any outcome coming from that group. So for now, we do not put any effort in this section. We do not have much urgency either. We do not have any existing case. Next slide. Thank you. So this is the last slide. Violation of any of ILO conventions. As defined in the Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, as conventions is something to be ratified by the country level. So it's really hard for the companies to implement. So this section is again, nothing additional, but a lot of interpretation, what exactly need to be done according to ILO conventions as defined in the fundamental principles and the rights at work. And that means 4 core categories that covered. It's freedom of association and rights to collective bargaining, and elimination of forced or compulsory labor, and abolition of child labor. So yeah, this additional requirement is said additional, but it's just what exactly meaning, because in the main section of remediation framework has a requirement that prevent the occurrence of PFA violation again. And so this is more like an interpretation, what exactly need to do against this, the freedom of association, rights to collective bargaining, compulsory labor and child labor. I skip reading up to save time for this, discussion later. Next slide, please, for that, so that the participants can read a bit. So yeah, that's basically covering the 4 core categories according to core conventions. So okay, now I back my mic to Salient.
Thanks, Shiz. Thanks for that overview of the modular approach for sections A through F corresponding with the policy for association unacceptable activities. I think for many of the experts in the room that have gone through the remediation framework and have a good understanding of this document, sections A through F are new, as Shiz has mentioned, and also quite useful in terms of the development of company-specific roadmaps and providing this modular approach to unacceptable activities which are relevant for the development of that company-specific roadmap. So thank you, Shiz, for that work and for that detailed explanation. Understanding that we can't get into all of the detail in all of the sections, but we would like to try to take a deeper dive now. I see that there's many questions that have come through the Zoom as well as that have come through Slido. So we've been working in the back end to try to aggregate some of these so that we can look at section by section in the remediation framework and organize the deep dive that we're going to take today. Alex, next slide, please. Just to give you a quick overview of the process that we're in before we move to the actual remediation framework document. Just to remind you, we are in the public consultation phase for the remediation framework. You still have time to present your questions, present your feedback in the public consultation platform. You have until the 21st of August to do so. And just as a reminder, the conversion remedy procedure public consultation is also open. As you've probably understood, Section D in the remediation framework is a placeholder for that conversion remedy procedure, and is obviously relevant for the work that we're doing in articulating a remedy process at FSC. So certainly take your time to fill in the public consultation and get familiar with the conversion remedy procedure as well. That process, I believe, is open until the 19th of August, if I'm not mistaken. So just to provide you a quick trajectory of the process that we're on, we will be sitting down together with the stakeholder feedback from public consultation for the remediation framework, also looking at the feedback which is relevant and pertinent coming from the conversion remedy procedure, public consultation, as well as from the policy for association public consultation, which ended on the 17th of July, so just last week. And we will be putting this together, connecting the dots, ensuring that we have adequate systems in place to create learning loops between the conversion remedy procedure, the PFA, and of course the PFA remediation framework to devise a revised draft. We will send the public consultation feedback, so the comments that we received through the webinars and also through the public consultation platform, together with the revised draft to the FSC board as an update in November of this year. And then we will work to finalize that draft, that second draft document for public consultation to start early next year. We're planning for a release in January of 2022 for the second public consultation. It is our anticipation that most of the second public consultation will likely focus on the conversion remedy procedure pieces that we are only representing through a kind of placeholder, and the pre-association process for remedying policy for association violations prior to association. We think that we have a rather mature and laid out process for the ending disassociation aspects and the scope of the ending disassociation process. So we might have a few tweaks that come in the second public consultation, but we anticipate that a lot of what we will be focusing on in that second public consultation will be around the conversion remedy procedure and this pre-association remedy process, which is not as articulated and mature as the ending disassociation process in the remediation framework. And then ultimately, after that second public consultation, we will then go through a revision session, again, receiving the public consultation, comments, redrafting, and ultimately we're planning to present a final document to the FSC International Board of Directors in June of next year, so June 2022. That is our rough plan of this process that we're in. And of course, we absolutely welcome your engagement, your comments, your participation in these webinars to learn more about the document and to learn more about the public consultation. I also wanted to highlight that we are planning in August a session for the remediation framework in Spanish. This will be targeted for our Latin American regional members and provide them an opportunity to receive the webinar in Spanish in their language and also to ask questions in Spanish. So that will be later in August, and we can provide the information in the chat if you're interested in participating in that webinar, or if you would like to share it with your colleagues, your network in Latin America. So with that, I would like to actually pass back to you, Amparo, to start the question and answer session, and to start going through the Slido questions.
Yes, thanks, Salem. We have a lot of questions, all of them really interesting, so that hopefully will trigger an interesting discussion. The first one that I wanted to tackle was this anonymous question we got right at the beginning, asking about the verification of forest conversion and the destructions of HCVs in 1994. How is that independently verified? So Anna, if you could respond to that question, that would be great.
Okay, so in these sections, then we kind of almost have 3 ways of checking. So one is the oversight of the remediation governance body, which will be the body that is independently established, that includes representatives of the company, but it is semi-independent from the company itself, and it needs to have at least 70% of non-company representatives on there, including stakeholders and rights holders representatives. That's not people who are directly harmed, but it is representatives of rights holders. So that they will oversee. There is a FSC third-party verifier, and there is also peer review by independent experts, and that's all in addition to whoever carries out the analysis of the forest converted, which may be the company themselves, or they may choose to bring in specialist consultants or work with a partner organization to do that. So to be clear, the verification itself, in the pure sense of verification, happens by the FSC third-party verifier.
Mm-hmm.
Back to you, Amparo.
Yes, I would like to give the floor to Aida Greenbury, who had 4 questions earlier, and I believe she's available to speak on her points so that we have that also a little bit of a discussion. So I'm asking to unmute Aida. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So yeah, it would be great if you can elaborate a little bit, since it seems that you have so many questions, and then we'll go through all of them, of course, and clarify.
Thank you, Amparo. Hi, everybody. Hi from Sydney. So I got 4 questions. The first question is, the conservation and restoration activities must be done according to the EPIC principle. But what happens if the communities disagree with the conservation or restoration activities? What would FSC or FSC ask company to do? What would be the next steps? Would it be the company's responsibility to find other areas, including to restore already planted concessions? This is what you would find in the field if you try to implement in Indonesia. And who would monitor that the EPIC process to ensure, its ingenuity? I mean, the ingenuity can go both ways. Ingenuity, whether the communities actually agree. So there are 2 types of communities: the real communities, and the not real communities, right? So there possibility that the communities are not real and basically say no, and oh, there's no other area to restore and everything. Or it's real, but then there's also real that there are no other areas to restore. What would the company do? My last question is, I'm also not sure about the definition of forest, HCV forest, and HCVs conversions. I think it's very important for FSC to make it really clear, because and then what is the definition of and the role of HCV management area. I give you an example, like Sumatran tiger is an HCV, but if you have a look at it, the whole Sumatra could be an HCV-MA for Sumatran tiger. So it doesn't mean that the whole Sumatra needs to be restored or back to where it was 300 years ago. So it's very, very important for FSC to be clear about the definition of forest, HCV's conversion, and the role of HCV-MA. Thanks, Emperor. Bye.
Thank you, Aida. Salem, would you like to talk to those questions? I think those are scenarios that are likely going to happen once the implementation starts. So it's good that we have that discussion already now.
Yeah, I can say a few things to this. I think this is we're getting into the technical detail of environmental harm, and we should allow Anna to speak to this as well. In terms of the FPIC process, and this is what I can speak to. The FPIC process, which is detailed in the remediation framework, this is the FPIC is the default requirement for engagement in with stakeholders and rights holders in the remediation framework. And part of what we call Section U, this is universal requirements, and is subject to third-party verification in terms of the efficacy of the policies and procedures which are put in place for managing FPIC within the organization. Ida, what you detail out is really how do we identify stakeholders versus rights holders? How do we identify those communities that are indeed genuinely impacted, affected by the activities versus those which are observing the activities or have an interest in the activities, but are not actually affected or impacted by the activity. And this comes down to Section RS. So this is the identification of rights holders and stakeholders within the human rights due diligence framework. This is the methodology that would be used to identify rights holders and stakeholders in the process. It's an iterative process. So I think what you're pointing to is that this is not a black and white issue. It's not a it's not something. You may not be able to identify or realize your full aspect or the full nexus of the impact of certain activities on rights holders until you've gone through the process the second time or maybe the third time. So it is based on an iterative process. And I would refer you back to Section RS in the Identification of Harm and the Human Rights Due Diligence Framework for that particular detail. Anna, I would like to give you the opportunity to answer questions 1 and 2 coming from Ida. If we can go there quickly, and then I think we need to look at the questions around fire as the next stop. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, Ida. Thanks for those questions. Yeah, to add to what Salem is saying, and also to in your first questions, you asked what if the local communities disagree with the activities or suggestion of activities. I just want to use your question. Actually, I'm going to share my screen and just okay, if that's okay, team. Okay. I'm going to share my screen and jump into the actual remediation framework. It's a bit wordy, but it's better to show you my screen and to just speak to this. So I want to show you about the remedy of harm process, because in our presentation, we didn't go through this in that much detail. And I think to your question, Ida, what if the communities disagree? And when you ask that question, it sounds like a scenario where maybe the company think like, okay, this might be a good plan to remedy this, and then go to the local communities and say, what do you think of this? And then they say, potentially, no way, we disagree. But the actual process is quite a bit more nuanced and complex. So I'm not going to read all these words, but I'm going to highlight. So first of all, in 341, the remedy procedures need to be developed. So the actual, how the process will work with the participation of rights holders and relevant stakeholders. Of course, they could disagree and not want to participate. And so we can come to that scenario once I've gone through this. Then there needs to be restorative practices picked as a first choice to try and find appropriate remedy of harm. And that has to be in dialogue with rights holders. And it may be that that there are traditional practices, and those need to be given a priority, traditional practices of dialogue, and those would need to be given a priority, and those used in these situations. So it hopefully really couldn't be a case of the company just going and saying, well, we think we should do this, do you agree or disagree? Actually, it would be more of a dialogue where a solution, a remedy was found together. So there's requirements for rights holders and stakeholders need to be informed in a culturally appropriate manner about grievance mechanisms, about they need to be given resourced access to independent advisors. Obviously, the company needs to have identified all the stakeholders and rights holders and map those. There needs to be really careful consideration of physical and temporal spaces to hold these dialogues. There needs to be representation of all stakeholders including rights holders, of course. There needs to be professional specialist support made for the whole process, and that's for both the specific needs of rights holders, but also the personnel of company groups as well. They'll need support in these processes. And independent observers should be allowed to participate in independent monitoring. There needs to be participatory evaluation of these processes to check, are they working right? So that's just a little bit of a flyover there. I'll stop sharing and we can go back and see the Slido questions. Ida, if the communities in question just completely refused and just did not want to participate in any of that process I've outlined, then obviously nobody could be forced. So then to go to your second question, what would be the next steps? So yes, the harm would still need to be remedied, and we're talking about environmental harm specifically here, but obviously there would be social harm involved as well. But if the community that had suffered the social harm said, we don't want anything to do with any of this, then that would have to be respected. But the environmental harm would need to be remedied, and the company would need to look and find other areas, as you've suggested in your question. Yes, it could be restoring planted concessions, but it could also be restoration of other areas, again, proximate to the area affected, and it can also be conservation. And then who would monitor FPIC? I think Salem spoke to that point in terms of the FSC third-party verifier. So and I think, yes, you weren't sure about the definition of forest, HCV, and HCVS conversions, and then also about the HCV management area. Okay, so we're using HCVs and not just HCVF, because that's reflected directly in the PFA, the Policy for Association, and that covers HCVs broader than just high conservation value forests, and obviously that does include social HCVs. And it's important that we have all of that covered by the remediation framework. I think you raise a great point about the management area, HCV management area, and that's a really key piece of feedback. And because yes, indeed, the Sumatran tigers HCV management area is the whole of Sumatra, and no, we're not suggesting the whole of Sumatra needs to be restored back to its original state. But obviously, it does need to be looked at for the key populations of Sumatran tigers, which is all Sumatran tigers, what is needed to support their welfare and their continued, hopefully flourishing. So that management area question, I think we probably need to do a little bit more work, because it's not actually a term that we use in the remediation framework, and it's clearly a useful term. So I'll hand back to you now, Amparo.
Yes, very good. I'm interested in this discussion that you guys had, and I believe like we're going to have a lot of conversations like this moving forward, the closer we get to implementing company-specific roadmaps. So it's good that we're starting to have these conversations now. I'd like to give the floor to Dharma Wan, who's been patiently waiting. I hope he's still available, because he was also going to be moving to another call. So I just sent you the unmute option, Dharma Wan.
Yes, I've already unmute. Thank you,
Great,
Amparo.
thank you. You had a question around forest fires, and we thought that maybe it's better if you also explain the background around it. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My question is related with the B 7.113 something like that. I read it about the forest fire. If I read that the indicator, seems that the indicator is based on the assumptions that the organizations or the company is actually the responsible one who put the fires on the field, something like that. Yeah, and then I believe this assumption will be based on the actual evidence, something like that. Yeah, maybe most of the company put the fire, something like that. I don't know. But my question is that how we prove this assumption is right when it happened. Yeah, second. Yeah, and then my further question is that in terms of the fires remedy to the fires, it can be also, the fire can be also driven by the impact of company operations, yeah, to the local community, to others. So the cause of the fire then difference. Yeah, maybe in the first one, if the company directly put the fire, they just looking for a cheap a cost for land clearing, something like that. But when it's because the impact of company operations, then the cost will be different. And then will be related with the maybe livelihood of the anybody or any community or any person or any company who have put the fires and then spread out to the organizations, yeah, something like that. So the cost will be different as well. And how we are define it, because the define which put the fire, to trigger the fire is important to identify, and then looking the cause, and then the impact would be also the cause, and the driver would be also important to develop appropriate remedy. Yeah, that's my first question regarding fire. And the second, actually, I'm also intriguing by the term significant and non-significant. Yeah, in the section 9.1, something like that. What is the threshold we use for significant and non-significant? And what parameter we measure of the threshold? Thank you.
Thank you, Dharma Wan. Anna, would you like to talk about this point on forest fire and the significant and non-significant?
Yeah, I can do forest fire. yes, I can do non-significant and significant as well, or maybe Salem might like to do that because that's a PFA definition. But let's start with fire. Again, I'd like to share my screen. So demo one, let's have a look at the fire section together. Okay. So just hopping back to, so here we are. This is so this is for PFA sections, and this comes under public and worker health. And fire is covered by other areas in the remediation framework because it will often lead to HCV loss. It will often lead to effectively converting. But to be very sure that all fire is covered, then it is here. And this is the section on traditional and human rights. And so we do look at this in terms of the environmental values that underpin the human right to health and well-being. And to reassure you, Dermawan, this is not intended to only cover fires that are started by the company itself. This is intended to cover all fires. And the company has obviously a key role as the manager of the land to try to ensure that all fires are ameliorated. And that would include fires that are caused from encroachment onto the land, to clear parts of the land, and on fires that even may start naturally, but then become out of control. So obviously many landscapes in the world rely on fire. Forest landscapes is a very important part of the ecology, but this is not true everywhere. And even when it is an important part of the ecology, fires can run out of control. So all the fire section here, which is from 7113 down, so the potential risk of damage by uncontrolled spread of fires on infrastructure, forest resources and communities. This must be assessed and mitigated by management activities. So there has to be a map of the fire-prone areas. There need to be management plans and activities to prevent starting of man-made fires, and management plans and activities to build resilience in the forest system in order to prevent the uncontrolled spread of fires. So that would be fires, whether they're man-made or not. And then a fire early warning system and mitigation procedures. So this would need to cover all fires. Salem, would you like to cover the difference between significant on significant and, well, it's non-significant conversion, but I guess it's not non-significant, but it's not significant conversion.
Sure. So the term significant conversion comes directly from the Policy for Association. This term defines the threshold for FSC evaluating the egregiousness of conversion in terms of its significance, which is defined as 10,000 hectare over the last 5 years converted, or 5% of the management area. And this term significant conversion is what we've been using in the Policy for Association to evaluate whether this threshold has been exceeded in processing allegations of conversion. I will say that in terms of the remediation framework, the term conversion, as used in the conversion remedy procedure, is part of the remedy process for pre-association or pre-certification, which is to be remedied according to the conversion remedy procedure. And the remediation framework is dealing with the remediation of significant conversion from as defined in the Policy for Association. So I hope that that answers your question, Dharmawan. regarding the distinguishing characteristics of those two terms.
Okay, thank you. I just have another issue about the fire. As I mentioned that earlier, that I'm just worried that if we are addressing about on the remedy of the fires here, but I would emphasize that if the fires happens by anybody in that area, and then the cause and the driver is because the impact of the organization operations, then the remedy plan should be addressing these causes, something like that. Maybe I need to read more about the section in PF area to the fires, but I still believe that the assumption is focused only to remedy the fires, the impact of the fire itself, but not really looking for the cause of why the fire happened, something like that. Thank you.
Oh, maybe I can respond straight away. Thanks for that clarification, Dermoan. No, this really is the intention, is to look at the cause. This is to look for prevention of fires. Yes, areas will need to be remedied, but because this is such a high risk that the section that I just showed you before, which is in section B, this is very specific measures, and this comes from, just so that you know the background, and perhaps this may help to answer some of Julia's question, which is coming up next. Julia's asking about the APP roadmap. So there was a draft APP roadmap, and it remains a draft, and the APP process was suspended. But that was a long process, which involved intense stakeholder working group work. We physically met 3 times, and those stakeholders, in fact, had been meeting with FSC in previous meetings earlier even than, or in the early part of 2017, and even earlier than that, to try to develop an APP roadmap. So it's that draft APP roadmap, Julia, that we're referring to. And back to your point, Dermoan, when we were developing that draft APP roadmap, that's where these section on fire and these indicators come from, that process. And it was very, very much Indonesian focused. And these came very much from the Indonesian experience and Indonesian key stakeholders with direct and very personal experience of fires. So that's the history of this section, and very much looking at the causes and hoping very much indeed to bring about prevention in the future. So I hope that's reassuring, but if when you read that section, Dermoan, please send us detailed comments, because in the consultation platform, because we really value this input to get this right.
Okay,
and
thank
back
you.
to you, Amparo.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, thanks, Dermoan.
Thank you, Dermoan and Anna, for all the explanations. Also, John Palmer had some comments about forest fires, so I asked him if he would like to speak a few words before we move on to another topic. So, John, I'll unmute you now.
Thank you very much. I'm speaking with considerable experience of deliberate forest fires in Brazil. And as you possibly will know, Canada is currently covered by a blanket of brown-black cloud from forest fires, some of which have been caused by natural lightning, but unfortunately many have been caused deliberately by humans, either with good intent or with bad intent. And I'm very concerned that in the development of this remediation procedure, there should be thorough desktop studies where you test to see whether your remedy copes with fires which start outside the management unit by a third party, maybe an unknown party, and then come into the management unit. And then what is the responsibility of the organization, that is the certificate holder, to control the fire. And it's not enough just to have a plan to do so. They've actually got to implement the plan. What is the responsibility of the contractor as opposed to the original license holder? And then what happens if fires are started either accidentally or deliberately by, again, third parties, that is not the company itself, nor the contractor, but someone else inside the management unit? What are the responsibilities on the certificate holder to control these fires? And if the fire gets out of control, who then becomes responsible, not merely for physically putting out the fire, but also for the remediation of the harm which has been caused, both environmental and social. So there are a number of easily definable situations which, in my view, need to be laid out clearly, perhaps in an annex, where you say, I have tested our proposed remedy procedure against these different situations and whether it does or doesn't work. I'm also concerned, and I put this into the chat earlier, that this really quite complicated remediation procedure should be tested by looking at previous PFA complaints. So FSC has a whole library of PFA complaints, and I do think that it's important to go back and look at those complaints, then their situations, and see what difference it would have made if the currently proposed remediation procedure would have been applied in the past to those historical situations. Thank you.
Thank you for that, John. I don't know, Anna, if you have further observations on this or what your thoughts are.
I would just like to reply to John. So John, yes, the intention is that this should cover the scenario that you set out. Again, you know, we're not only focused on if the company itself started the fire. I mean, fire is fire and it is a terrible risk. It's a growing risk and the impacts are catastrophic, as very sadly, too many of us are starting to experience firsthand. I take your point about needing to test scenarios. I'm not sure if you've read the guidance as it stands. I think given what you've said, then we probably do need to add something to the guidance. And I take your point on doing desktop testing of scenarios. So thanks for those points. Yes, harm, environmental and social, does need to be remedied from fire, regardless of where the cause is. Once it's in your management unit, then it is your responsibility, and harm, the remedy of harm, is the responsibility of those there that needs to be repaired. And that's remedy of harm in the context of the PFA policy elements, I should say, and just make that clear. So obviously, you know, small fires may occur and may not actually impact any of the policy elements in the PFA, and that would be down to you know, we are hoping that this system approach will have companies thinking very holistically about remedy throughout their practice, but what FSC will be verifying is against the policy elements of the policy for association, just to make that very clear, because there are places in the remediation framework where we are seeking the establishment of a system-based approach, and some of those systems will go way beyond the policy elements of the PFA, as is good best practice. So John went into another point about testing old cases. So that I would need to hand over to Salem to to answer that part of his question. And I noticed that Idle also has a question about fires, so I think we can come back to this fire point.
Yeah, Anna, I'll take that part of John's question. John, what I can tell you is that the remediation framework is an outcome of years of policy for association, case processing and learning from all of those cases. The remediation framework has not been developed in a vacuum, but has been developed out of some really serious case learning, very intense discussions with stakeholders, very intense discussion with organizations with whom FSC has developed ending disassociation processes. So I feel very confident in telling you that that indeed this remediation framework that you're looking at comes from years of experience working with the policy for association and processing policy for association cases. Having said that, I do take your point regarding the desk evaluations. I think this is relevant. I think it's more relevant to actually apply them to those cases that FSC would be seeking to end disassociation with, which are currently on the roster, so to speak. And I think that this is something that we could take into those cases, into those environments as part of our continuous learning loops, which is certainly one of the most prominent features of the remediation framework in terms of universal requirements. So with that, maybe we could go back to Idle's question, Anna, regarding his question, why are we talking about fires and where is the connection to encroachment and illegal logging?
Yeah, I was wondering, Idle, if you wanted to speak to this, because it would be good to have a conversation with you. So we're not seeking to avoid encroachment and illegal logging. Fires are captured here under traditional and human rights and about the human right to health and well-being as one of the best places that we can find to make sure that fires really are fully captured. So we have section A on policy element A on illegal logging and encroachment. And then we see that we have illegal logging and encroachment mentioned specifically throughout the remediation framework. Obviously, there's a crossover there between fires. So we're not seeking to leave these out, but that's why I'm wondering if you wanted to unmute and just let me know a bit more about your question, because I'm not sure if I'm interpreting it properly. And I know you very deeply, you know about this topic extremely deeply. So are you able to speak, Idle? Let's see. Maybe not. You might be
Yeah,
in
I
a
think maybe
tricky
not because,
place.
yeah, I also suggested before and they didn't confirm, so perhaps it's not easy right now.
Okay, okay. So yeah, I hope I've answered that as best I can. We've not listed encroachment and illegal logging in this section because it is so, well, we felt so well covered elsewhere in the remediation framework, but do give us some really specific feedback on that, Idle. You know, it's very welcome. Okay, back to you, Amparo.
Thank you. I thought maybe we can tackle the question from Gemma that we got at the beginning of the session asking about COVID crisis and how, and if we are considering extending our deadlines to make sure that everybody has a chance to provide feedback. I can't find the exact question right now, but it was along those lines. So basically making sure that everybody has an opportunity to comment in that, assuming that they might have less chances in this COVID crisis. It appears as anonymous on the on Slido because there was a limit in the number of characters. So since this is more of a process type of question, maybe Salem, you could speak to this, if this is something that we have considered.
we have, I don't know that if the question, Gemma, and maybe you want to clarify this, but in terms of our outreach to Indonesian colleagues and our Indonesian stakeholders, we of course have held 2 technical webinars on the remediation framework, as well as a general information session on the remediation framework. We have published the remediation framework in Bahasa Indonesia. We have also, in our webinars, we have offered simultaneous translation in Bahasa Indonesian to ensure that those stakeholders are also given a voice and are comfortable asking questions, and ensure to receive information in their language. So I think in terms of treating our Indonesian colleagues and Indonesian stakeholders with due deference and importance, we do think that we've tried to accommodate their language needs as well as their time needs, scheduling all of these webinars in accessible time zones for Indonesia, including this particular webinar where we have all gotten up before our normal morning hours to make sure that we are available in time zones which are comfortable for our Indonesian colleagues. So from this perspective, we think that we have emphasized the importance of Indonesia. We've emphasized also the importance of Indonesian engagement in scheduling the webinars, in providing simultaneous translation, and also all of the documentation in a language which would be accommodating for that stakeholder group. In terms of COVID-specific measures or COVID-specific outreach, I think this has not been a specific filter which we have addressed in public consultation. We're of course very aware of the fact that Indonesia is struggling in the COVID crisis, and that the situation is quite dire and quite serious in Indonesia at the moment. And we would be open if Indonesian colleagues, Indonesian stakeholders would require additional access, additional support during public consultation, or require additional time to fill in public consultation questions, we'd be open to considering that. Certainly, the COVID situation has been a struggle with which we've tried to overcome, all of us in some manner in each of our geographical and local contexts. So certainly we'd be open to receiving that if there's additional measures that FSC needs to take into consideration to overcome certain issues that are being caused by the COVID crisis. We'd be open to receiving those and to considering those. So Gemma, if there's something specific you're thinking of, let us know, and we can consider this. Okay, I think Amparo, I would move back to you. There's another set of questions that has come through that I think we should address.
Yeah, so I was planning to move into the question that I think both Arya and Julia asked around piloting, and then potentially Arya might be speaking to this point as well. So yeah, the question from Arya is how we plan to do the piloting of the remedy procedure. Is it going to be tested, whether the procedure is applicable, or also to test whether the remedy framework actually delivers the expected outcome? That's his question. And then Julia also talks about pilots. Why would we do pilots when there's a lot of global expertise on undertaking remediation on many different types? If remediation type is agreed in the roadmap, then does this imply that there will be periods of pilots in every case? And this will happen before remediation in full starts? Is there a maximum time limit for pilots? So there's a lot of questions around the piloting. I'll hand over to Anna or Salem to start speaking to these points, and then maybe Arya can elaborate further.
Salem, did you want to take the first part of the pilot question? Because we have kind of two levels of pilots. We have the pilots that FSC will do early on with the remediation framework, and then we have the pilot requirement within the remediation framework. So I think, Salem, if you speak to FSC's pilot aspect, and then I can speak to what's inside the remediation framework.
Sure, maybe it's helpful to just take a look at this from 10 meters above the ground, just looking down at the remediation framework. FSC has its own learning opportunities in implementation of the remediation framework, which is part of FSC's continuous learning and FSC's co-creation aspect of the remediation framework in terms of piloting the infrastructure pieces required for supporting the remediation framework. This includes the third-party verification. This includes the demonstration of progress website. This includes the initial piloting of the remediation governance body. A lot of the pieces that you will find in section U is based on FSC supported infrastructure in operating the remediation framework. And so there's piloting and continuous learning aspects from FSC side. And then, of course, in the remediation framework and as part of the company specific roadmap to be implemented by organizations, these are the piloting of the identification of priorities and the identification of pilot sites to then be implemented. So I think looking at from 10 meters above the ground, looking down at the remediation framework, there's two different areas of pilots to be conducted. Some for the continuous learning loops for FSC to operate the remediation framework, and some for the continuous learning loops for the organization implementing the company specific roadmap to learn. I think I would hand to you, Anna, to maybe bring it down to the ground from this 10-meter view, and then I can take questions specific to those FSC pilots if needed.
Okay, thanks, Salem. Hi, Julia. Yes, so in terms of the company needing to learn itself from experience on the ground, then yes, we do require pilots. I mean, hopefully companies will be learning from that global expertise, and indeed FSC as well, learning from that global expertise of undertaking remediation on different levels. And as well as learning from others, we do have to learn ourselves. We don't have time limits as such on the pilots. In the first technical webinar and the overview webinar on the remediation framework, and the recordings are available on the website, the FSC website page for the remediation framework. We did cover that we have a 5-year, broadly speaking, a 5-year time frame. And after those 5 years, there will be a review period. But we, whilst there is space within the remediation framework for company-specific roadmaps to have specific time periods set within them, and that would be during the roadmap setting process. The stakeholders involved there would be looking at those time frames. We do have space for those. We are moving away slightly from pressurized timelines, because what we've learned, and this is particularly learning from others, and particularly those with a lot of FPIC experience, but also wider than FPIC, just community level dialogue with whoever those communities are or whoever those groups of stakeholders are, is that often the time pressure is quite negative, and it can cause rushing to perhaps the wrong kind of solution, and just maybe cutting corners. Whereas if the time, if that pressure is off a little bit, then we believe that there's a better chance of getting to a better solution. Now, this doesn't mean that there can be nothing happening or just treading water or things held in suspension in abeyance for long periods of time, because there has to be a very serious review meeting after 5 years with FSC to review progress. And if progress is poor because of lack of commitment, lack of resources, lack of implementation, as John was saying before, plans have to be implemented, not just made. So in section U, the universal section of the remediation framework, we do have a very specific requirement that speaks to exactly that there must be actual good resources applied and implementation must occur, not just things going down on paper. So back to being specific about pilots, then yes, there will have to be a period of pilots in every roadmap case. Does this happen before remediation in full starts? Yes, it starts early on. And so there may be an overlap in that full remedy processes may start once pilots, perhaps a few pilots have concluded, perhaps some are still coming in. So there could be an overlap, but yes, broadly speaking, the idea is that they're done first. Okay, back to you, Amparo.
Thank you. I want to unmute Arye Sojegadi. Sorry, I probably didn't say that right. And he's going to speak a little bit on this point just to clarify and make sure that we clarified his question. And then maybe Arya would ask you to also elaborate on the follow-up question that you had on another topic that was related to the definition of harm, since we give you the floor. Arya, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Amparo. Actually, both the questions that I raised, they are actually quite linked to each other, because obviously there is let's say high ambition, right? So, from FSC to basically cover many things, including like the impact, the harms caused by the unacceptable activities that needs to be remedied. But the question is also, if we are going to, well, I'm quite indifferent right now, whether this is a good thing or actually a little bit beyond what probably what implementable or not implementable. But if we want to pilot basically this concept, basically that we want to remedy whatever harms caused by past activities, then how do we actually demonstrate this to the stakeholders that this is the framework that works? Because eventually, what will need to come from a framework is the result, right? So the outcome that the remedy actually works, right? So there is an outcome that has been achieved, right? So and I don't know, how would you actually design your pilot around this? Because if it's only about the procedure, whether the procedure is applicable or not, eventually it will become more like I don't know, like bureaucratic, right? So it doesn't. I mean, the implementation of the procedure doesn't necessarily translate into the expected outcome, right? So it doesn't necessarily translate into an achievement that you want to achieve. Thanks. So I hope that clarifies. Otherwise, I can further elaborate. Thanks.
Thank you, Arie. I'm not sure if this comment requires further follow-up from Anna or Salem, or we should close this point. Salem, would you like to speak further to this, or what's your thought?
I mean, I think that Ari's getting at. I think what he's putting his finger on is the feasibility of implementation, and is maybe calling into question whether, calling into question the feasibility of these indicators. What we can say to this is certainly feasibility is important, and we're looking for an outcome-oriented implementation of the requirements. And from this perspective, certainly this is a key issue, and something that we will be very concentrated on and concerned with. So I suppose this is another area for continuous learning, and we really look forward to receiving your comments in the public consultation, and from learning from the HCV resource network in this respect. If you have some case studies or some implementation learnings that you can share with us.
Before we close the topic on the piloting, there's a final comment from Julia Young that is also referring to the feasibility of doing piloting, and she's highlighting that the process as it is right now, it's rather lengthy. Yeah, just raising this point that there seems to be a concern from her end, and she's asking if FSC has really looked into this and into the timelines that we're asking for in terms of piloting. Perhaps we'll move on to other questions because we're having them starting to pile up.
We should respond to that. I think it's quite an important point, Amparo.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Salem, did you want to say something? Because Julia's asking, she's saying, so a couple of years to agree a roadmap, 5 years of piloting, a review, which could take a year. I'm not sure what that review is, Julia. Seems like a very long time before remediation in reality, in which case, who will maintain stewardship? Has FSC looked at this? So yes, definitely there's a couple of years potentially, hopefully not that long, but it could be to agree a roadmap, hopefully much shorter than that. Yes, it's 5 years. There isn't a year-long review after the 5 years. That will be happening concurrently. The third-party verification will be happening through that 5-year period. And then there will be, at 5 years, there will be a big meeting to review where everyone's got to. So that wouldn't be a kind of a separate desk study, year-long process or anything like that. But Salem, did you want to speak to this point? Because we did really get into this issue quite deeply in our the draft APP roadmap process.
Yeah, I can say a few words to this, Julia. I think I think your observation is, gosh, this seems like a really long time period before we can actually see delivery of results on the ground, and this is concerning. And I guess my response to this, and maybe if I can reflect some of the conversations that we've had in other cases, is that there's we need to reach a balance between the robustness of processes, the credibility of verification, of reaching milestones, and verification of those policies and procedures that are in place in order to start implementation of remedy processes, that that it's really there's a strong emphasis in the remediation framework on the establishment of these foundational blocks in order to operate the remediation framework, to ensure its credibility and robustness for dealing with such sensitive and fragile issues. So there's a lot of emphasis put in establishing those foundational pieces up front, which is time consuming, which is difficult, which requires a lot of commitment to the process and investment of resources. But in our conversations and in our learnings working within case management, we found that if we're able to have a strong set of foundational principles on which the operation of these processes can run, the actual running of the processes themselves is more credible. The stakeholder processes are working better, and we're actually able to see results sooner. So you do see that the remediation framework puts a lot of upfront concentration on section U, these universal requirements, but it's really there to make sure that we're able to run a credible process. So we need to balance our outcome orientation with the number of months, years that it takes in order to reach milestone outcomes against the credibility and robustness of the process. So it's not a dilemma, I guess, it's a trilemma. and just as most things are, we need to ensure that these pieces stay in balance. So the emphasis is not on the amount of time that it takes to reach those milestone outcomes only, but rather we have to balance that against the credibility, robustness of the process, as well as the quality of those milestone outcomes and the verification thereof. So I hope that helps to make these timelines a bit more understandable and maybe a bit more easy to digest.
Thank you, Salem. The point on the balance, I think, is quite important. I'm giving the floor to Julia Young, who's going to comment a little bit on this point as well. It seems like an interesting discussion. Julia, I've unmuted you already.
Thanks, Amparo. Yeah, I appreciate the need to have a robust process, but I feel if, say, you're spending 2 or say 3 years on the roadmap process itself, to add another 5 years of piloting is excessive. I mean, in many cases, you might have that somebody needs to establish, areas where there can be forest restoration undertaken. There could be other relatively simple measures. It might be that, a payment needs to be made to a community to undertake actions. I just feel that, if we're looking at pilots in a 5-year period, we're just giving ourselves too much time to actually initiate remediation. So, I really think we need to consider very hard that it should be the exception that you would have to move into a period where there were very, complex pilots that needed to be undertaken, not the rule. Because really, how you would maintain stewardship over these processes and these pilots and getting to the ultimate full remediation otherwise, I really don't know. I think it's far too long. I saw there was a comment about remediation over a large area taking a timeline being logical. I'm not saying that full remediation wouldn't take a long time, but I'm just saying that taking 5 years to do pilots before you move to full remediation, to me, particularly when there's a lot of expertise in many remediation types, would be too much. So this is why I think we have to consider this point very, very carefully in the remediation framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. I think the
Perhaps,
point is well
Amparo,
taken, but
perhaps,
Yeah, no, I
Anna,
think we need to respond, Amparo, 'cause,
Sure.
otherwise we're not acknowledging these comments.
for sure, yeah.
Julia, we're not talking about 5 years of piloting. We're talking about a review after 5 years for everything in the remediation framework. So if it isn't all finished within 5 years, then there will be a review at 5 years. There's no intention for it to be a 5-year piloting process. Absolutely not. Quite the opposite. We would be horrified at the thought of 5 years just on pilots. It would be far too slow. There needs to be a diversity of pilots. I think I mentioned in the presentation that it could just be a case which is with one single household or even a single individual. So a pilot could happen really quickly, just in a matter of weeks or a couple of months, just to check, okay, does this process we're doing work? So perhaps in a way that the pilot issue has been, perhaps in highlighting it in this webinar, has been too granular, in that too much emphasis is on it. If we didn't have a requirement for pilots, I know we would have a lot of criticism. In fact, you know, the pilots are in there to make sure that things are got right on the ground and that there is a chance to learn early on. So there isn't any intention to make this 5 years. We're not just piloting complex issues, it's also simple issues. And there's every possibility to just start getting on with things once there's a clear idea that the proposed procedures or approach is heading in the correct direction. It's merely it's a flag to say, and it is a requirement, so it will need to be verified that it's happened, but it's a flag to say, hey, test this and check that it works. The actual number of pilots, that's down to be defined for the specific roadmaps. So in some situations, it might be quite a simple case and it might just be one pilot is required. In other cases, it might be much more complex and there'll be a wider variety of issues and situations. Certainly, when we were the thoughts of the stakeholder working group that were drafting the APP roadmap, they saw a great need for pilots, and certainly not just one pilot, a range of different areas. And sometimes this is the pilots is also to build trust with the stakeholders, you know, in the widest sense, and then those pilots can be observed, and but no intention for this to be a delaying tactic, or certainly to cause delays when there's a great urgency to get on with remediation. And back to you, Amparo.
Yeah, there's 2 follow-up questions from Julia on the same point. So she's asking, what is the maximum timeline for pilots? And then she's also saying, then why are we waiting 5 years for this review?
Well, the 5-year review, Julia, is for everything in the remediation framework. So the remediation framework covers an awful lot, not just pilots. It covers the actual remediation processes, social and environmental, plus all the establishment of the base infrastructure systems, which are captured in particularly section U that we already covered, plus all the identification of harm, the mapping, and other procedures that will have to happen to look at for the identification of harm. So that's the submerged part of the iceberg, to use the analogy from the slides here. So all of that in the complex cases, that could take up to 5 years, that identification of harm, Now, the identification of harm doesn't have to be completed before you start remedying. That would, working in that linear way would just cause delays. These all can all overlap, but 5 years is kind of the maximum time that FSC would allow as a company roadmap to run before a major review. Obviously, it's all going to be third-party verified during that time. So it's not that it isn't being looked at, but to actually have a sit-down conversation around the table and say, okay, this is what has been achieved, this is what has not been achieved. So I think you may be suggesting that you need to review earlier. I think built into the third-party verification, then obviously these are mini reviews each time the third-party verifier goes in. Then there are specific time points within the remediation framework that need to be hit during those 5 years. So effectively, the third-party verifier is doing a review as they go along for FSC, and FSC will be checking that. But this is kind of like, it's kind of like a train arriving into a terminus where everyone's off the train. Let's have a look here. I think probably we can improve understanding by sharing. We don't have a detailed timeline slide at the moment, but we do have an overview timeline slide, which we used in the other webinars. So perhaps we can pull that up and screen share and show that. That might help. What is the maximum timeline for pilots? We don't have a maximum timeline for pilots, but I think perhaps what you're saying to us is we need a maximum timeline for pilots. Back to you, Amparo.
Yes, thanks. Those are really important points that we've been discussing. The next question in line is about the HCSA social requirements and how FSC might or might have not aligned the framework with these. And we have several people asking about this point.
Yeah, I can answer that. So yeah, we agree. These are great. And so that's why they're referenced in our guidance notes. So we refer people directly to those because, yeah, they're very, very good.
Okay, thanks. And then the next question that we wanted to clarify, maybe Alex, if you can scroll down in Slido, was coming from Aida, and it was related to suppliers and the scope of that. I'll search in the chat box as well. I think this was a question that you wanted to clarify earlier, Salem. If you can't recall, then that's okay. I'll search for it.
No, it's fine. This is the question from Ida.
Mm-hmm.
And Ida was asking, how would FSC ascertain or define, ensure that short-time suppliers are included in the remedy for environmental and social harm in an ending disassociation scenario? And this is a question that Ida asked in the other technical webinar on the remediation framework, and there's a proposal in the remediation framework for how to ascertain this supplier list in order to define the nexus of remedy for the remediation framework. I think this is a really complex issue, Ida. You probably know better than I how difficult this could be to ascertain all the way back to 1994, a list of suppliers which would be required to remedy for environmental and social harm within a company-specific roadmap. So if you have helpful tips, if you have helpful information that you can share with us on how to do this better, that would be really appreciated. Because I think this is obviously an important issue, and doing this, coming up with a formula which would be applicable to all of the cases is probably likely unrealistic. So we probably need a kind of case-by-case approach in how to do this, how to ascertain this list. But if you have ideas, please share them with us.
There was a question before from Ari. I think he commented on it when we gave him the floor, but perhaps it's worth discussing about it a little bit more in extent, because then he asked again about the same thing, and it's about the defining harm. So he's asking, would you mind elaborating also how the scope and extent of harm is defined? Harms from recent activities may not be fully grasped, and harms assessed at the present time may not be directly linked to the past activities. When can you say that all harms have been remedied? And then later, I believe he asked if we would consider implementing remediation actions without conducting a harm assessment, but directly just linked to the violation of the PFA. So he seems to have a lot of questions around this point. Would you like to speak about this, Anna, or?
Yes, I'm just looking for, so Ari's question is here in Slido. Yeah, Ari, I mean, harm, especially social harms, it's a really crucial point, because social harms, first of all, they may date back an extremely long time. They may not be immediately obvious. One of the reasons why we have less emphasis on conflicts, it's not that conflicts don't count, they do, but we have less emphasis on conflicts than previous earlier drafts of the generic roadmap had in, for example, because a lot of harm exists even when there isn't apparent conflict, even where there may not be clear complaints, because people may have got so used to living with the harm that they almost immediately don't see it. And when it comes to social harm, it's very important that harm that is there and the harm that those who've suffered it wish to have remedied, when they understand the process of what's happening, that does need to be remedied. So the scope, extent of harm, how is it defined? So it's defined in different ways for different policy elements for the PFA. So in terms of, we have a start date of 1994 for conversion and for illegal logging. But then we have 1999 for HCV, because that's when that was defined. And there is no statute of limit on social harm. No statute of limitation on social harm at all. So harm, social harm, so that would be policy element B within the PFA, that can go back all the way through, back earlier than 1994. So when can you say that all harms have been remedied? Yeah, and you've got details in the chat. So the first thing to say is we're certainly not looking for all harms to be remedied within either before ending of disassociation or within the 5-year period after which there will be a very full review. And I should add about that very full review, having read some more of the comments in the chat since last speaking about this, it's at that point where it would be really a question of, has there been enough progress made here, or should this process be stopped from FSC's perspective? Should it be suspended, or just said, actually, this just isn't enough progress, that this isn't enough? or is it a case that it's a very complex situation and it needs to continue? But perhaps we do need to look at more formal meeting review points at a shorter time period, having heard your feedback. But back to this, when can you say, elaborating on the scope, extent of harms? Yeah, in the definitions section, under the definition of past, then that's where it's all absolutely laid out of the different sections for the policy elements. So I hope that's the clearest answer I can give you and refer you to that definition of past.
Thank you, Anna. The next question that we can perhaps answer comes from Gemma. And yeah, she's asking what happens if during piloting there are further human rights violations? I think this is a question that a lot of people might be wondering about. Salem, can you perhaps elaborate on this?
During the implementation of the company's specific roadmap, there's a clear process for processing new policy for association violations. And Gemma, I think you're pointing out the policy for association violation of traditional and human rights. What would happen in the case that during the implementation of a company specific roadmap that new allegations of human rights violations or other PFA violations would be raised. Those allegations would be processed according to the procedure for processing policy for association complaints, so 01009 in the FSC normative framework. And were a policy for association violation to be confirmed or substantiated, in this case, then that would be grounds for termination of the company specific roadmap. So this would be taken very seriously if there were new policy for association violations that were to be raised during the implementation of a company specific roadmap. That being said, of course, an objective, a very strong objective of the remediation framework is the prevention of reoccurrence of policy for association violations. And it's certainly clear that there could be continuing harm from past policy for association violations, which continue through the remediation framework that have to be addressed. But new policy for association violations would be taken very seriously and processed, processed, and then if substantiated would be grounds for termination. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Salem, for that very clear answer. I'm going to give the floor to Arie, who would like to make some further comments related to our previous point on the identification of harm. Arie?
Thank you, Emperor. Sorry to get back again to this point. So I fully agree actually with the point raised by Anna earlier that harms is also is very important point to address, right? But the thing is that to use it as a main reference to the remediation. Actually, I don't know. It's the issue that I see that how you actually quantify those, and how actually you limit the scope of of the future harm as well as like recent harm caused by past activities, which is like it is not like a very straightforward quantification. If you define unacceptable activities, right? Because the extent of clearing or the extent of people who have been displaced because of certain activities can be easily, well, not easily, but it can be based on objective evidence, right? It can be based on certain verifiable evidence. But if we think about harms, that is basically quite dynamic and basically can also extend to the future, whenever new knowledge, new information came in, right? That these activities has caused harms in the next 30 years. So that becomes very challenging, and I don't dismiss the idea that this is an issue that we need to tackle, but I'm not really sure about the implementation, how this is going to be verified, because eventually, we need to verify everything so that things can be, so it doesn't present any bias basically from any parties, so that everyone can actually see the evidence as well as the progress with verifiable indicators like KPI. So if we have a changing environment, of like changing concept, so changing extent, changing scope, then this is obviously very difficult to implement, because you cannot verify certain things that change like every single year, let's say, because there is new information coming in. Thanks, but I think this is a discussion that we probably need to continue at some point, I would say. Thanks.
Thank you. I hope that you have time to put all of this in writing as well and participate in that consultation, and we can definitely speak about this further. If Salem or Anna, you want to make any further comments to this, please feel free. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question. So if we move on to the next question, I think we can answer Julia's question regarding the stewardship of the process. Yeah, she was asking who will maintain the stewardship of this process in the 5+ years that it entails. Salem, would you like to respond that?
Sure. And Julia, maybe if I don't get this correct, if I don't get the emphasis of your question correctly, then please correct me. My understanding is that Julia is wanting to understand who's actually overseeing this process and overseeing the delivery of the outcomes during this 5-year process, because it's connected to the issue that John has raised regarding changing of ownership, opening up of ownership loopholes, who's actually overseeing and ensuring the integrity of this process. So certainly FSC has a role in overseeing the integrity and credibility of the process in the implementation of the company's specific roadmap through the Demonstration of Progress website, which is the reporting platform that FSC is managing to demonstrate and transparently report on the implementation of the company's specific roadmap for all of the cases that FSC is handling. In addition to that, FSC's management of the third-party verifier through the verification of those milestones in the company's specific roadmap. FSC also has a direct role in managing that third-party verifier and managing the processes by which the verification is done. So the overall stewardship, as you use the term, Julia, FSC has a large role to play there. But in addition to that, the company implementing the company's specific roadmap also has a role, certainly in taking ownership of the remediation process, taking ownership of the policies and procedures which are coming from the universal requirements and the implementation thereof, and really leading the implementation of the company's specific roadmap and driving those milestones and those outcomes. So FSC has an important role in overseeing the implementation of the company specific roadmap, as well as the company itself. And then ultimately the remediation governance body has a role in overseeing the implementation and reviewing the outcomes and ensuring that the remedy outcomes are meaningful and applicable to the rights holders and stakeholders that are involved in determining these processes and in determining the remedy outcomes. So I hope that answers your question. If not, please correct me. I would like to just take an opportunity to stop by or to address the questions from Julia and John regarding ownership and the change of ownership, and this idea that that there's a relationship between the number of years that the remediation process is taking and the change in ownership or the opening up of an ownership loophole. Just to be clear, the scope of the ending disassociation process includes the company suppliers. This is the question that Ida asked earlier about how to ascertain or determine the company suppliers, which is obviously relevant for determining the scope of remedy in a company-specific roadmap. And I would say, because the scope of the remedy framework includes not only the company group but also the nexus of suppliers, as documented through the supply chain, that this covers the ownership loophole. So I wouldn't see the ownership loophole as a relevant or as an oversight in the remediation framework, because it's actually covering the entire scope of the supply chain. To address your question, Julia, around the change in ownership of legal entities throughout the implementation of the company specific roadmap. Again, because the scope of the company specific roadmap includes the company group and supply chain, which is larger than the definition of the policy for association definition of ownership. Again, I don't see the changing in ownership as a major issue in the implementation of the company specific roadmap. Certainly it's something to keep our eye on and to understand what those changing ownership relationships are, but I don't see it as a kind of oversight or loophole in the implementation of the company specific roadmap. If you see that differently, I would be interested in understanding where you see that oversight.
Related to this, Salem, there's another follow-up comment in Slido that is asking, how do we know or make sure that all the relevant suppliers are actually included in the supply chain mapping that is provided to FSC? And then they say companies may throw away related documents following their document management rules. So I suppose the question is really, how do we make sure that we have the right mapping for suppliers with these companies?
Yeah, I mean, we have a proposal in the remediation framework for ascertaining the scope of the supply chain. This is one proposal, and yeah, we are absolutely open for additional input, information, learnings from your experiences on the ground in how to do this better. So if you have something, case studies or other references or proposals for doing this work, then please share them. We're very open for this.
We also have a question that is somehow related, not exactly, that asks about contractors. And I was commenting about that in the chat box. But I don't know, Anna, if you want to add something more to John's comment on companies'
Yeah, I hadn't
responsibility.
realised it was in Slido. So yeah, John was worried about fly-by-night contractors, short-term contractors with no traceable addresses, and about them being held responsible. So if the company or company group contracts contractors to do work on their behalf, then the responsibility for remedy is with the company and company group. So if the contractor does a disappearing act, then it's the company group that has to remedy that harm, and they're responsible at all times. It's as if they did it firsthand. And the PFA does speak to that and the current draft. I'm sure the next draft will also be clearer. And so I replied to John saying that that was the case, but John's still worried. He says, I know this in theory, but in practical terms, the social harms inflicted by contractors in terms of working conditions and labour relations, so for their own employees, may be severe in impact, but short in time because the contractor keeps changing its legal name. Similar problem in prosecuting drug dealers. And Julie is agreeing with John on that. So I can only repeat again that they would be responsible, and that the workers within that contractors are actually rights holders, and that they actually need to be informed by the company group of the grievance procedure and of their rights as rights holders. So the company group will have to have processes in place that mean that those even very short-term workers know that they have rights, and that has to be that information has to be given to them in a culturally appropriate way. So yes, that is challenging, and yes, FSC does need to keep an eye on that. I don't know, do you have anything to add, Salient?
No, I mean, I think this is, I think what John's pointing to, what Julia is also affirming, is that this is really complex, and even states with prosecutional power have a really hard time in fully embracing or ascertaining those responsible for commission of harms. And as you said, Anna, we try to manage this by putting the company in the position of being responsible for the breadth of those harms, and for remedying that, even in the case of a situation where the responsible party is not ascertainable.
Thank you both for those clarifications. I think we're getting close to the end. We still have 3 questions in Slido, but I believe we've already answered them before. We touched on the HCSA social requirements point earlier, Gemma, but Salem or Anna, would you guys like to add anything else to that point on how we are aligning our framework with that guidance?
I think we just haven't taken it out of Slido, maybe.
Yeah, I believe so. Okay, so no further clarifications on that one. And then on Aria's question, I think we also sort of answered on whether we would consider this immediate remedy. I think the answer to that one is no, really, because there needs to be this harm identification first.
Actually, I disagree with that.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there would be
Yep,
nothing. There would be nothing to stop a company from just getting on with things. You know, if they were certain, if they were certain of the way they were headed, you know, we wouldn't encourage. And I think perhaps we need some clearer guidance on this. That if you, it depends on the size of the company. So I'm thinking about a very large company here, which is very complex, a large company group. So in a very large company group, then there just could be so much hectareage, so many areas, so many suppliers, that if we asked that was just assessed first before any remedy of harm took place, then I think that would just be very, very counterproductive. So of course, many companies may have some really good systems in place already, and the reason that they're disassociated or perhaps prevented from entering into the FSC system may be down to 1 or 2 specific cases. And other things may be going well in other areas. And so we wouldn't seek to stop any of what's going well or even attempts on remedy of harm. You know, again, it's not a linear, like first do this, second this, second this. It's more that many things will have to happen at the same time. And so these mapping exercises to find out where the harm is, you know, these may take some time, but you may be picking up, you know, less obvious cases once you're into that realm. And the most obvious ones may be quite glaringly obvious and already very well known about. And yes, certainly things could go ahead with those, you know, when the time seemed right to those involved.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anna. We only have 4 minutes left, so I would suggest that maybe Alex, you launch those polls at the end of our presentation. So if you can do that now, that would be great. And then in the meantime, just asking everybody in the audience, if somebody else has any further comment that they would like to make, please feel free to raise your hand. This would be the moment before we close our session. If
There's
yeah.
one last question in the Zoom regarding the questions that are coming from this webinar and how they will be treated in the public consultation. And I just wanted to be clear that that we will be using the questions and the comments and inputs that we've received through the webinars as input into public consultation. But we do ask you to also participate in public consultation to make sure we get the full breadth of all of the input and comments that you're providing us. It's very useful to use the Zoom chat and the Slido record for a reference document for public consultation as part of our feedback. But of course, it's very limited in terms of the number of characters that you could use or the full, for providing a full understanding of the feedback that you're providing. So the answer to the question is yes. The record of the Zoom chat as well as the Slido questions will be added to the public consultation record, but it doesn't necessarily replace the meaningfulness of public consultation feedback, which can be much more, can be longer and more detailed.
Thanks, Salem. I'm going to hand over to John, who has his hand up for some final remarks. I believe he wants to share with the group. John?
I'm sorry, I put it into the chat box instead, and
oh,
Salem's already replied. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So yeah, we're getting a lot of answers through the poll. I can see that it's really divided. So some people really agree with the path forward and others seems to still be quite confused about it. So it's like a 50-50 at this point. Perhaps we can also move on to the next poll so that we get another understanding of the follow-up question we had there. So in this case, I think it's clear that we still need to provide more webinars and opportunities for information because although people have learned a lot about this process, there's still multiple questions and discussion points. So that's what we want to allow in the next months, weeks, to make sure that all this information comes through and that everybody is more clear on the process. So we will make sure to provide those opportunities to you moving forward. So that said, I think we probably can close.
Maybe we can go to the last poll regarding additional webinars.
The one we have in front of us, or?
No, this one.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yes, so we also have interest in specifically on the remediation framework and the conversion remedy procedure and their overlap. So yeah, this is something that we can consider, I guess, Salem and Anna, on providing in either a webinar or some other type of forum, so that we make those clarifications that I think, yeah, a lot of people have questions about this. We do as well. So yeah, that's good to know. And with this, unless there's further remarks from your end, Salem, I think we can close for today. And the conversation is to be continued through the public consultation and potential future webinars as well.
Yeah, thanks, Amparo. Yeah, it's your participation is much appreciated. And yeah, our hearts and minds are with you in Indonesia. We hope that you stay safe and healthy and are able to yeah, make it through this difficult time. And certainly if you have additional ideas for further webinar topics, we're open to this. Please send us an email, please send us a WhatsApp and let us know what topics you'd be interested in. It looks like there's a lot of interest for a conversion remedy procedure, remediation framework connection webinars, so we can work on making this happen. So thank you very much again, and stay safe out there, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Have a good day.